Good afternoon and welcome to the first Biomass Connect webinar of the autumn, or should I say in the common parlance, Season 2, Episode 1. My name is Kevin Lindegaard of Crops for Energy, and I'll be facilitating this exciting session that will cover biomass crops and water management. Now, as frequent viewers of these events will know, that I start off with a big plug for the Biomass Connect website. Then I introduce the topic. Then I introduce the two illustrious speakers. Then there's a Q&A session, and then there will be a panel session at the end. Now, talking of the behemoth of the Biomass Connect website, it's fast becoming the place to go to get all of your biomass information. If you've got a question, if you want an answer, if you want to compare crops, if you want to read a technical article about these crops, if you want to watch a video to find out how to do it and how they grow, or to go to an event near you, all of that information is on the Biomass Connect website. It's a one-stop shop that is not selling, but giving away free all of this wonderful information. And the great thing about not only the website, but also the trials of the hub sites that we've planted, they're constantly growing. And there's more and more information, and the trees and the grasses are growing. So what you can do is grab yourself a pair of boots and come and visit us and see some of these trees and grasses in action. Or you can fill your boots in the meantime by enjoying all of the choicey chunks of information on the website. Now, this is being recorded, this webinar. So if you are watching on YouTube now, then please subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing, then please give us a like. Throughout this webinar, please use the chat function to ask any questions, any burning issues you have. And I'll be moderating the questions and asking the two speakers at the end. Now, residing in our virtual green room at the moment, we have two great panelists, Chris Johnson from AFBI and Neil Watkins from Energy Crops Consultancy. Neil will be dealing in the second half of the presentation with the use of willows in flood mitigation. And in the first half, we will be dealing with, Chris will be dealing with the use of willows as water quality protection. So very interesting stuff there. But before we get started, here's the news, the headlines. Climate change is raging, droughts, forest fires, storms and floods. Oh, we have a bit of breaking news. In a speech to the all-party parliamentary group on water, Sir James Bevan, the former chief executive of the Environment Agency, said that water is about the most important thing there is. Mr. Bevan added that it's essential for life and everything else. Water, its quantity and its quality, is the single biggest X factor for the state of nature. He concludes, the thing about water is that it gets everywhere. So you better make sure you have the right amount of the right quality in the right places. And now the sport. Okay, that was a spoof newscast, but the reality is that was a speech that was made by Sir James Bevan a year or so ago. And a lot of it is obviously incredibly pertinent, especially when we're dealing with this this current webinar today. And I'm just going to go through some of the things he said in that speech about the effect of climate change on water resources. And this is not just in the UK, but all around the globe. So climate change is driving heavier and more violent rainfall, which is overloading sewage systems more frequently, leading to more discharges into rivers, overwhelming urban drainage systems more often, causing more surface flooding in our towns and cities, raising sea levels, causing higher risk of dangerous coastal flooding, and washing more contaminants into our rivers. It's climate change, which is causing greater pollution. Climate change is also driving hotter temperatures and lower summer rainfall, and causing higher drought risk, damaging water quality and killing river wildlife. Now, that is a perfect storm of stuff that's going on. A huge, big load of things that we need to deal with, we need to adapt to with climate change adaptation measures. Now, the good news, the great news, the news story that ends the news bulletin essentially, is that biomass crops can really be effective in helping us deal with all of those things. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to Chris, who's going to talk about water quality protection. Chris has been at AFBI for about a decade now, and he's been working in this field for 15 years, not only putting systems in to help with biofiltration, but also with the science that goes behind it. So he's got a load of slides and he's going to inform you. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kevin. Yes, thanks for the introduction. Okay, Kevin, that was all sort of quite depressing whenever you mentioned all those comments from the parliamentary hearing. But when we're working in biomass crops, yeah, we do see a lot of benefits that can be experienced. I've just summarised a few here. We're all aware that biomass crops have a role. They've got a role to achieve net zero. They've got a role to achieve net neutrality. They've got a role certainly within the future going forward. We all think of them as possibly energy crops, but they're carbon resources. They're biomass resource crops. So we do have a carbon need for carbon. We do have a need for carbon resources going forward, and we need to keep our minds on that. Hence, we then start to focus on the use of or the implementation of fast-growing woody tree species. And yes, we're going to focus on willow here, but with the Biomass Connect sites, which Kevin mentioned, we're looking at other crops like miscanthus and eucalyptus and alder and a number of different fast-growing and leguminous trees as well. We're going to focus here on some of the aspects of the multifunctionality. So not only is it a carbon resource, but we're talking about environmental protection, or rather I will now. Waste management, there's many biodiversity benefits, some of the pictures we see in the right, the carbon sequestration, and of course we talk a lot about carbon capture utilization and bioenergy carbon capture utilization and storage. But all in all, biomass crops can be a diversification opportunity for the bioresource demand that we will have in the future. Okay, a little bit about AFBI at the moment. The picture on the left, which I rather like, kind of shows the setup. But yet, those of you who haven't visited our research farm before, we're a multifaceted farm, livestock mainly, a lot of grass and pasture. But as far as the environment and renewable energy, and if we like the bioenergy setup, that picture on the left shows it shows an energy center, biomass boilers. We've got 3 different biomass boilers. There's an anaerobic digestion plant up there producing heat and power, and we distribute all that heat around the farm to displace fossil fuels. We also got an irrigation system where we recycle wastewater, and we're managing that into a willow plantation. All the willow is harvested, and I'm going to go through some of the platforms now, as I say, to displace fossil fuels. Other areas that we work on are the potential of biomass crops for landfill, leachate, and for pharmaceutical production and biochemicals, and we do a lot of demonstration, of course, as well. So there's a lot happening here, and anyone who's passing through, it'd be great to have you visit our site. A few of the things which Kevin mentioned there, yeah, we've gone through a summer of where there's been quite a bit of notoriety about pollution, and this is a start. Just to introduce the next slides, it's not just Northern Ireland, but we've had a fairly disastrous summer here where we've had a lot of negative publicity with regards to pollution. There's research and data and evidence to prove that it's not all agriculture, of course, but over 60% of the pollution is attributed to agriculture. The remainder would be attributed to wastewater treatment, septic tanks, industrial pollution. All in all, we've got too much pollution is really what we're saying, and I'm going to go through some of the solutions that we have here. There's a mention there in England as well, but it's the same story. So we are talking about both trying to mitigate and try to manage point source pollutions, but also diffuse pollution as well. So this picture, a number of you may have seen this before. We are undergoing here in Northern Ireland a soil nutrient health scheme, essentially. And in that soil nutrient health scheme, first in the world, we are able to sample almost every single field in Northern Ireland, get the soil nutrient status. But also one bit we're doing for the farmers is we are mapping the, if you like, the hydrological profile of their farm. So this is an example of the sort of data that farmers would get. This is a LiDAR diagram, along with digital terrain modeling, taking in the soil quality, the sort of type of soil into the computations as well. And I think you can see probably quite clearly that it kind of maps and it focuses the eye on where we are likely to see hydrological connectivity and runoff in the eventuality of a rainfall event. We know that we've had so much rain lately, so it's not hard to see these actual rainfall pathways in our fields. It's just a matter of going out and walking through them, you can see them. But we can see there that there is indeed a concentration of flow, and we can see that that red line is a stream, actually, the one that goes from sort of top left to sort of middle right. That's a stream, and we can see that, yes, there is indeed kind of a tendency for rainfall and for runoff to focus down towards that center. So with a European project that we started a long time ago called WaterPro, Northern Periphery and Arctic, we thought we would see if we could develop and investigate whether indeed willow plantations could be a part of this solution. So if you can imagine that last picture that we saw, and this is one of my favorite drone pictures, we can see that that plantation that we have in the site has actually now, it was taken probably a summer ago or 2 summers ago. The plantation is well established, it's up, it's running, and it's intercepting the runoff, the land runoff that's coming from this particular subcatchment. This subcatchment represents about 24 hectares, and we can see that it stretches all the way. The river runs from the south of the screen all the way to the north of the screen. Yeah, and the square that's just pulled out in red there illustrates the replicated site that I referred to, which was started under that Northern Periphery and Arctic project, and the bit that we mentioned before is actually spawned under another European project, which was Catchment Care, which was led by Donegal County Council. Difference being here, and the next slide will show, is we've got an actual proof of concept willow plantation, the big triangle one I showed, but we also have this scheme here. And what this is doing is it's a replicated site which is comparing the runoff through both grass buffers and through willow buffers. Now the grass is acting more like a harvested silage grass platform, but the willow buffer zones are actually acting as a buffer. There are about 10-meter wide buffer zones. You can see that there are 6 hydrological pathways illustrated by those 6 arrows. There's 3 going to willow, 3 going to grass. And what we've been doing is we have been collecting the runoff. The little picture on the bottom you can see kind of illustrates how we can get runoff down the platform. This is on a hill, by the way. They can't really see that from the photograph, but it's on a hill. So that any runoff is channeled into that trench at the bottom, and then it funnels its way. You can see the picture there on the right-hand side, second up from the bottom, is showing how the water will then be channeled through a V-notch weir, where we can get a trigger for sample collection, refrigeration in the ESCO below, and it'll trigger a monitor as to the volumes. So we can control that, we can monitor the volumes that are running through as a result of rainfall, and we can also store samples in the ISCO, which will then go to the laboratory for analysis. So what we have been discovering through time, now we have had difficulties over the last 6 or 7 years because we've had, platform maintenance issues, we've had COVID, we've had people not being allowed to work on the farm, number of different reasons as a result of that COVID. But we've been monitoring both the concentration and the volumes, and I'm taking out here one particular aspect, which is the total phosphorus. The total phosphorus concentration multiplied by the volume of flow that goes through those sites is giving me a loading. And what I'm seeing is a general kind of increase in the separation, which you can see from that diagram. But I'm getting on average about a 35% reduction in total P export as a result of the willow plantations. So they're replicated, been running for about 6 years, and I'm getting a 35% reduction in P export. Just a few more points to illustrate from this data. The one top left is one I've just shown, this reduction in P export. It stands to reason we would see a reduction in phosphorus running through willow plantation for many reasons, but the picture or the graph in the top right is showing that I'm getting this quite consistently. I'm getting this ongoing reduction in phosphorus, which gives me some confidence in the data. And the reasons for this, bottom left is some data just showing that the overall moisture content of the soil is that's just a chunk of the data there. It's always showing that the soil in the willow is always drier than the soil in the grass, and that just they pass each other, or they map each other all the way through the seasons. But the willow will always be a drier soil, and the reason for that, I think, is partly illustrated by the graph on the bottom right, which is an average of a lot of data now. And it shows that we have a higher conductivity, a soil hydrological conductivity. So if you know those percolation tests and t-tests where the water goes into the soil, we have an automated Sachuro setup there, which is illustrating that we get a much bigger conductivity in the willow area. So the willow is like a big soaky sponge absorbent biofiltration area that is encouraging water to soak down into the plantation, where then the crop with its high evapotranspiration capability will then manage that water loading. I want to talk now very briefly. That was diffuse pollution I was talking about there, which could definitely have a role out in our agricultural environment in conjunction with, say, livestock agriculture. But what we've also been doing quite a lot of is the management of point sources. So discharges, if you like, from septic tanks, wastewater treatment works, industrial pollution, and even landfill. But we'll concentrate on wastewater treatment here. And so this is just a few drawings that I think kind of quite like, because it illustrates what we're trying to do. Starting off on the bottom right, this is a small wastewater treatment plant that we adapted recently in a project, European project Catchment Care. It was basically taking the discharge from a wastewater treatment works from a housing development, and instead of discharging it into the stream, what we're doing is we're collecting it and we are irrigating it into the willow plantation. Now, in order to do that, we use the bits and pieces that you see in those other pictures. We've got pumps and we've got PLC controllers, we've got flow meters, we've got valves center bottom, and then ultimately we've got the irrigation point in the left hand side, and they go up and down the field. In the septic tank itself, or in the retention tank, the picture in the top right, we'll have a number of different floats and controls in order to kind of manage the discharge, if you like, along with the controller and indeed the environment. So it'll only irrigate if the soil can take it, if it hasn't been raining, and if it really needs to irrigate. And if there's a problem and it cannot irrigate, it'll overflow and go back into the stream. And the reason for that will come clear in a second. This is just a couple of photographs which just show in real life what we're talking about, in case anyone hasn't seen these type of systems. But look, it's the big willow field, and then we've got these pipes that run up every third or fourth double row. Yeah, so we can see there's a picture of it after it's been harvested. I think there was one other picture there, but we might have skipped over it. We can see there's a picture of the pipes in the field, and the one that we saw just before that was a picture of how the pipes look after it's been harvested. There you go. So we can see that the harvester's been through, it's taken all the biomass away. The biomass has gone away for processing, but the irrigation then can continue, and those crops will re-sprout in no time again and continue to grow until the next harvest. Okay, so I'm just going to illustrate one particular project because I think it's really quite useful. This is a project that was built back in about 2013. It's a 30-acre site, 3 large fields. The discharge that comes into that wastewater treatment works comes from a town with a population equivalent of about 600, 700. So it's a fairly large town. All sorts of reasons why this site was chosen, but we've been irrigating since 2014 or 13 even, and we've got some really interesting data. This is showing, actually bring up the next one as well, Alan, please. This is just showing the last 2 years, 2022 and 2023, and I rather like this data. So the brown bars show the volumes of effluent that is coming into the wastewater treatment works, and the green bars are showing the volume that has been able to be discharged to the willow plantation. In other words, all that water, all that nitrogen, all that phosphorus, all that nutrient has been used to recycle, to fertilize the biomass crop for a circular bioeconomy and reuse. And anything over and above that hasn't been able to irrigate it, yes, it does. It heads back into the waterway and it's into the environment. In other words, it was as you were, if you like, before the willow plantation went up. What we saw in 2022 is, if we look at the summer months, between March and October I took there, we irrigated about 89%. Little bit of data work to do in the last year so far, but again, we're really high. I haven't got the data from August and September. I was trying to only inflows, not the irrigation. But again, really high irrigation, if you like, very high removal of the discharge from the environment into the willow plantation. Point of this, I think, is really interesting, because if we talk about global warming and we talk about climate change, and we talk about kind of drought periods and wet periods and drought periods, we will get occasions, and we did this year as well, where some streams in our rural environment actually have got very little flow in them at all, and we possibly shouldn't even be irrigating. But of course, if there's a wastewater treatment works that's discharging, it'll keep discharging, whether the dilution is there or not. So when we're looking and considering rural wastewater treatment works, the application of willow biofiltration to manage that effluent in a non-discharge point of view into the stream, I think is really, really valuable. And I think you can probably see as well that the land-based irrigation system and the discharge into the water work hand in hand. And with climate change coming and that variable climate, it's even more applicable possibly than it has been. That picture with the red and blue is just because I've got quite a lot of data now over the years, but the blue bar is showing the whole year percentage irrigation, and on average, says on the bottom text, 50% of all the inflow into those wastewater treatment works is being irrigated. So only 50% of what used to be discharged is being discharged. And in the summer months, 85% of everything that comes into the treatment works is being irrigated. So only 15% of what used to be discharged in summer is being discharged in summer. And in the summer, we've got lower flows, we've got more heat, more light, we've got more potential for that nutrient addition, if you like, to cause ecological decline. So I think removing the nutrient during the summer months illustrates even more the applicability of solutions like this to link nicely with a sustainable environment, especially in a changing climate. The next click, please. It'll just be a little red line. I'm showing there that on average, I'm irrigating about 2,300 cubic meters of effluent per hectare and about 74 kilos of nitrogen and 3.5 kilos of phosphorus. Those are important figures. If we look up the sustainability and the crop nutrient and the crop offtake and what the crop actually needs, and more importantly from the literature, at what level would we start to potentially break the system? These are well within capacity. So I don't believe we've got much risk, and certainly research we've run ourselves illustrate that fact very clearly. Just to bring you up to speed, again in a project that ended at the beginning of this year in March, we built 2 more of these small systems on rural wastewater treatment works where we're doing exactly what I've just illustrated. We are removing the discharge, or a large proportion of that discharge, especially through kind of ecologically sensitive times of the year. We're removing that and we're irrigating into the willow plantations. One in the Republic of Ireland, one in Northern Ireland, and those are the 2 systems that we built. They're roughly about 4 acres each, and they're sustainably taking that wastewater. We can just a few pictures again just to illustrate. That's what we were faced with there on the left. This kind of gungy, smelly, horrible, nasty discharge. I can't believe it really should be happening. Like the picture on the right hand side as well, you can see sort of the build up. Yeah. So that's what we saw before. Then this is just showing what was happening. It's really relatively simple. Big hole dug, big rings put in. Those big rings you can see on the left hand screen, they're put in. That's your sump. The discharge runs into that sump instead of directly out to the stream. The sump fills up, float switch comes on, clicks a pump. Pump looks at all the environmental credentials. Can we irrigate? Yes, you can. It's dry. It's above temperature. The soil can take it and irrigates it. There's you can see the pipe running into the sump on the top. And there's your just quite muddy day. I took the photograph. Apologies for that. But we can see the valves on the bottom of the screen, although it's all grassy and lovely now. And those are the valves that control the irrigation out to the plantation. Yeah, and that just shows the willows at an early stage last year, all flourishing nicely, enjoying the water and the nitrogen and the phosphorus it's getting, and now we've got a nice sustainable solution running on that wastewater. Yeah, and this is just showing the kind of stuff that is the kind of data, if you like, that is trapped and stored. There's a lot of information, and I think that information, you'd agree, is very useful to the operator of the system. It can all be controlled from a small phone, a small computer. We can turn it on, off, inquire from the database at any time and get really good information of what's being irrigated and what's running through. Yes, this is one last bit I wanted to put in as well. I'm talking about large scale irrigation into field areas. But actually, there is also a way to do this in terms of sort of smaller, well, I would call them smaller, but they can go up to sort of 50, 60 PE. But they're line systems, and we all know there are parts, especially in GB and in the Republic of Ireland as well, where there is no discharge to ground capable. There is no percolation, there is no infiltration. And these systems are built especially to fit in with opportunities where a discharge to ground is not acceptable. So these are proving to be quite effective in helping to get a planning permission through, or helping to get an actual solution for the wastewater. And they work very much in a balance. It's a hydrological balance. The willow will take up the nutrient, no problem there. When the willow is harvested, it'll mine that nutrient off. But through the winter months, when the rain comes in, the rain level rises, and then through the summer and spring, when the willows start to grow, the water level rises. And it's just meant to continue like that and be nice and sustainable. So these systems do exist. They were invented in Denmark. That's where we see loads of them. We don't have very many of them running in Ireland. There might be 1 or 2 in England, but I think we'll see a lot more of these going forward. And finally, these are some other aspects we're working on. We're working on trying to use willow plantations for managing landfill leachates. And I've just shown here some nice platforms. Top left is a landfill, top right is some sort of filtration media. Bottom left, again, is on a landfill where we've got replicated irrigation of different rates to go into willow plantations to try to prove to the authorities that indeed this is a solution. But I think that's me done now. So I'll move on. And so we will introduce something in EnviroCrops, and we might say something in EnviroCrops at the end, Kevin. But we will introduce something in EnviroCrops to kind of give an indication for anybody looking at these systems, what indeed they would look at and require. Okay, I think that's me. So thank you very much. And I have gone a couple of minutes over time, so apologies for that.
That's great, Chris. Thank you so much for that. I would say, judging by all of those things you're involved in, you're a very busy man.
I just hope there aren't actually any more slides after that. So
no, that's it. Well, there is the questions one.
Yeah,
so there is a question there. Is there a measurable impact on yield from the added NP and irrigation?
Really interesting, actually. So a couple of things I'd say in that. I had a group out this afternoon and we walked through the diffuse irrigation, or the diffuse interception plot that I showed in some of those diagrams. The willow is really massive. It's really massive, 2-year-old and 3-year-old. It's growing extremely well and it's never been fertilized, but of course it's receiving potential runoff. So we will see that. Now, I showed very briefly at the end the lysimeters on a landfill. There were 12 of them. The lysimeters that are receiving nothing will be less than half the yield of the lysimeters that are receiving irrigation. I've got all the data. It's not kind of published or anything yet, but there's no doubt the nutrient in the discharge that we are feeding the willows is making the willow yield enormously higher. It'll depend on the soil. Quality.
Okay, so following on from that, it's yielding much better. What are the implications not only in harvesting but also in using the wood chip that is produced?
So this is referring to referring to the buildup of any particular nutrients or nasties within the biomass itself. We did some work a number of years ago where we found some small elevation of nitrogen in the biomass, but other than that, there's no difference. We've also had some biomass tested which have been irrigated in landfill leachates to see if there's any increase in heavy metals. Also, we've done that on sewage sludge as well. You will see an increase in certain heavy metals in the biomass, but then that could be a good thing. You know, if you're wanting to bioremediate a field, it's quite nice to be pulling out cadmium and zinc and a bit of copper and whatever else. So you could see an increase in that. But I think most interesting of them all is a bit of work that we're trying to develop with Sweden recently, as they have, and so do we, concerns about forever chemicals and fluorinated hydrocarbons and PFAS, things like this, which are prevalent in our environment and they're all man-made. They will be uptaken by the willow crop as well. So they can be uptaken. Now, is that a bad thing? Well, probably not. It depends how the biomass is going to be used in the end. But I would always say, you know, we need those carbon resources. It depends what the carbon resources are grown on and what they've been biofiltering. But if there's real concern about the buildup of nasties or heavy metals in the biomass, then the biomass goes towards a waste for energy plant. You know, it still is useful. But in that particular point, we are using the biomass to clean up the environment. So I don't think that's a terrible negative.
Excellent. All right, well, we'll come back to you, Chris, after Neil's presentation. We've got a panel session there with plenty more questions for you, no doubt. But before we get to Neil, we're just going to go over to the weather centre to have the weather forecast. So currently, probably raining where you are. In fact, today there are 122 flood warnings in the UK. This autumn, we have already seen Storm Agnes, Storm Babette, Storm Kieran, and this week alone we've had Storm Debbie, and we're just about to get geared up for Storm Ellen. Now, of course, this causes widespread travel disruption and is awful for anyone that is flooded out of their homes or their businesses. The outlook, well, if it's not raining now, wait 30 minutes and it probably will be. Now, I jest again, but it's not really that funny, to be honest, because this is the state of play. This is what we're dealing with a state of emergency based on the climate change crisis that we're dealing with. Now, if you just think back just a few years ago, 8 years ago, storms weren't called anything. That it was just a rain event or something like that. There used to be things, names for hurricanes and cyclones, but now storms are coming thick and fast all the time, and sometimes we get up to 3 a week. Now, in my own career, which I've been involved in biomass crops for almost 30 years, there's been once in a while the odd sort of thing that happens that I think that is going to change everything. One of these things was back in 2011, a report that was produced for the Forestry Commission and the Environment Agency, which was called Woodland for Water, Woodland Measures for Meeting Water Framework Directive Objectives. Now, the reason why I say that this was what I thought at the time a game changer is because it had lots and lots of positive things to say about short rotation coppice willows and short rotation forestry, not only in water protection, but also in flood mitigation. I quote from it, it says, "The rapid growth and multi-stem nature of these crops makes them ideally suited to flood risk management." It also adds, but there is no incentive to plant energy crops where they could benefit water most. Now, I thought, based on cause and effect, and all of the flood events that we were having back in the teens, let alone now, and as an optimist, I thought it's only a matter of time. However, the wait goes on. Now, moving on to our next speaker, Neil Watkins will provide some compelling evidence why farmers should be rewarded for the flood mitigation potential that they can offer with biomass crops, in particular willow. Some of the examples he shows are from farmers he works with up in the north of England that are doing a wonderful job, an excellent public service, but they're not being paid for it. Neil's been in the willow game for around 15 years, planting and harvesting, supplying power stations and boilers. And I'm going to just pass straight over to you, Neil. So the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon to all. I'm just going to talk through some experiences, introduce myself. I've been running ECC consultancy for the last 4 years, and then before that working for a very large power station, working with over 300 growers. ECC now works with about 150 growers, involved in surveying, designing systems to fit in with current farming systems, and we are planting, managing crops and harvesting, and we have that all in-house. And we're also selling wood chip for predominantly small biomass boilers on farm from 200 kilowatts, 1 megawatt, up to larger power stations. And we also provide a bedding product through the willow chip, and now also willow glow heat logs briquettes into the domestic market for our growers. Talking predominantly about natural flood management now, and how it fits into the system. When we look at all the storms, the biggest storm that sticks out for me is half of my time I live in Cumbria, half of my time in Yorkshire, and in Cumbria, Storm Desmond 2015. We planted a crop in Keswick, and we had a storm where 2 lakes in Cumbria joined up, in Keswick to Bass, which is the lake next to Keswick, and it joined in the middle. And unfortunately, a lot of land and friends of mine farm in the middle section. We had a 1-year-old crop. That 1-year-old crop hit one of these peaks that you see on this graph, and the amount of rainfall that came, looked worse than what you see in this picture. It flooded into farmyards. It created huge swimming pool depth of craters where soil had just been washed out of the farm, and let alone debris and everything else. What we are looking at here is to try and put some things in place that prevent the soil erosion, stop the damage and stop the carnage. This farm in Keswick had planted about 14 hectares of willow, and it had 1-year-old willow there. I got a phone call asking me if I would go out and visit this farm. We couldn't physically go to that farm because all the roads were flooded, above truck height flooding we're talking. And the reason that the farmer wanted me to see it is that he said all of his other fields were damaged, in a mess, fences down, but his willow crop was fine. It caught an amazing amount of debris and there was no soil erosion throughout the crop. So it was a living example of what we've listed here: prevents soil erosion, holds water, holds debris, preventing damage and bridges being blocked, and big debris, sleepers that would cause damage to anything they hit. So interestingly, we just planted this willow not for natural flood management, not for any of the things we've listed here, purely for a biomass or a bedding to provide on the farm, but it became a solution, or one of many solutions, for him to sort of protect his land. Here's a little example of some debris. This is another crop of willow. There's about 300 acres of willow. This particular crop gets flooded every year well over head height. The reason that the landowner put this in was he'd lost livestock, he was losing fences, he was losing arable crops, and we put these fields of willow in, and these actually protect arable crops behind the fields of willow. They protect all his fencing for his livestock, and also at certain times of the year and winter he'll put livestock into the willow for shelter, and then draw them out, and then obviously it intercepts lots of debris like this. Debris clear up at the end. People say, oh, I don't want to be clearing all this debris up. Debris, probably half a day to a day, clearing up the debris, collected, got rid of. That is stopping bridges and other things being blocked up. So it's not as bad as it seems. You can't really see from that picture, but the willow is planted at 180 gaps, tram lines for your tractor or a forager, in our case when we're harvesting. So those 180 gaps are very easy to run up and down with quad bikes or small machinery to collect debris, which is what we and a team of guys did on that crop. One thing that willow is very good at is a very hardy crop. It can cope with being underwater for a long time. Willow and poplar, they're the two main crops that we plant. Why is it so good? It doesn't let off any toxins like a lot of trees do and start killing themselves. Willow just thrives in that environment. It doesn't need a wet environment to thrive, but it does still thrive in a wet environment. So it intercepts rain at 16,000 cuttings per hectare when we plant, which normally gets to about 15,000 cuttings when they're fully growing. That slows the water down. Willow has the highest hydraulic roughness Manning's value, which we'll look at briefly in one of the next slides. So it slows water. In slowing water, it's stopping soil erosion, but in slowing the water, it's slowing the damage. It's also filtering the water. So if there's any nasties, I think we talked about that earlier, it takes them out and it keeps our water clean in the rivers and lakes and any sort of small streams. Under the trees, you'll notice it's a lot drier, but it also evaporates water tremendously. And because we've got so many willow trees per hectare, we are getting vast quantities and volumes of water evaporated or percolating down into the soils rather than just rushing through. So I won't bore you with this, but just have a quick glance at it and look at the bottom, number 5, Willow's Manning's value, strongest for hydraulic roughness. We're not saying that we should be planting willow everywhere, but in the right place for the right farm, for the right farming system to aid that farm, be it for his own biomass use, a local market down the road for bedding, or biomass or a larger power station. It fits in, and it is one solution and one tool in the toolbox of many things that can help. We have a lot of land now that is just persistently flooding and people are losing crops. What our suggestion or our thought is, think outside the box. Are there areas that you could plant that then protect other areas that you could still farm, be it livestock, arable or something else? This is coming time and time again. We have more than enough land in this country for food, energy, biodiversity and all the many other things that we need. That's clear from all the studies that have been done. So do consider it. It can be used for multiple purposes, as I say, shelter, bedding products, biodiversity increase is second to the oak tree for positive bugs, etc. So do consider it for the wider perspective and how it can fit into your current farming system. So our model is designing, planning and looking at your farm system and how does it fit in or not fit in. the access for machinery, harvesting. It grows back as soon as we harvest it. We harvest generally every 3 years, sometimes 4 years. One of the strengths of this crop is if there is a flood or it is too wet, for instance, at the minute, everywhere is too wet. A friend of mine's still trying to get potatoes out of the ground. It's been quite a harsh year for all of us in the farming world. You can delay the harvest a year. You can put it back 6 months. It doesn't matter. We can harvest stuff as size of your arm, size of your leg, every 2, 3 or 4 or 5 years. The worst we've done is a 10-year-old crop. Wouldn't recommend that. Generally 3, 4 year harvest. So the harvest can be delayed if we're in a flooding situation. And then it just grows back again. And the fastness in the growth is phenomenal in year 1, 3, 4 meters. And we can delay that harvest into the spring rather than do it before the winter if that area generally floods, if you're needing it for natural flood management. We can harvest sections of the crop at different times. And then we have instant wood production. And the crop, we know, easily lasts for 30 years. And we think if it's looked after and protected, just like any other coppice, it will go on longer, probably 50 years as a crop. So in summary, we're providing a commercial productive crop that can help in energy, animal bedding, mulch products for apple tree orchards that guard against apple scab, right through to a heat log that's used in your wood burning stove at home. And it's coppiced, so it grows back again and again. We're not having to replant. It can then protect a lot of our forestry that can go into sawmills and house building. It holds back water. It's to slowly release throughout the rivers rather than a gigantic rush which causes damage, and wanting to protect structures and housing downstream. Just to bring a reality to this, a lot of my friends in Yorkshire were flooded just in these last few weeks. And as I said, in Storm Desmond, Cumbria was underwater in a big way, and that's what made the news in my hometown in Cockermouth. And yet we can still provide a good income and yet help biodiversity increase, general nature and clean water, as Kevin started at the very beginning of his talk. Thanks very much. I hope that's been useful. We have 8, 9, 10 big case studies in Cumbria, Yorkshire and wider that we can show people how it works on the land, how it fits into the farming systems, arable livestock, river protection, bank protection. So there's plenty of examples of it working. Has been working for a number of years and a number of harvests. So please get in touch if you'd like to see those crops. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Neil. What I'll do is I'll ask you a couple of quick questions and then we'll bring Chris back in for the panel session. So my first question is, it seems to me that willows do the job of flood mitigation quicker, arguably better, and a lot cheaper than a typical woodland. Why then is there a woodland creation grant package totaling 10,000 per hectare, but nothing for planting short rotation coppice willow?
A very good question, and it's quite sad really there's not an obvious big grant. There are some capital grant natural flood management small grants around, and you can work up some grants if you work with your local catchment areas, Rivers Trust. We've done it with a few. So you can work them up. They take a long time, and you've got to show people them working, a lot of background support, a bit like plant trees. Why is there not a national? When we came out of Storm Desmond, we were asked to present to 500 people with the environment and the Forestry Commission and various NGOs, Natural England, to show how willow had worked. We didn't plant it for that reason, but we showed. We did site visits, and then out of that 2 booklets got written for natural flood management, and willow was put in both booklets, the Rivers Trust booklet and a Forestry Commission booklet. The back of that, there wasn't a clear big grant like there is for the trees. We had to work these individual grants up. So I think it is a big gap in sort of an opportunity that's been missed. And it's a bit sad, really. I think it's generally because the Forestry Commission get brownie points for growing trees. And then there's a sort of a farming side, and willow actually comes under a farming crop. It isn't considered as a woodland, a permanent woodland. So I think it gets missed a bit by our friends at the Forestry Commission because they don't get the brownie points for it. and I think it gets missed a bit in agriculture because they don't realise it's an agricultural classification as an arable crop. You get your single farm payment when we did get our single farm payment for this willow crop. So a real opportunity that I hope over the next few years people will grasp and get hold of, because it clearly makes a huge difference on the farms where we've seen it planted.
I've got a question here from an anonymous questioner saying, we have carbon credit systems where private companies can pay to offset their own carbon footprint. Does a climate adaptation model exist where the private sector can pay for flood prevention actions, for example? They might want to do this in communities where they have their business. Any ideas?
Again, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute obvious opportunity. Kevin, I came into Willow 15 years ago for biomass, and it's just been a mammoth eye-opener to Willow not just do biomass. It does a ream of about 20-30 different things, and one of them is that. And it's a shame because it's one of our native species is willow. I think something like 500 varieties out there, and it's got so many opportunities to benefit so many other industries, and enhance food, not not instead of food and stuff like that. So yeah, another opportunity. Let's grab it, and if there's people listening in that can help shape that, please go for it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Chris, do you want to rejoin, and then I can ask you individual questions, but also a couple of them together. So I've got one for both of you really, and Chris, you can go first, and then Neil. So I would say that as Neil just said, this is a no-brainer. That across Europe there must be zillions of opportunities for both using willows for dealing with pollution, water pollution issues, both point and source and diffuse, and also dealing with flood mitigation. How many are there, if any, and why aren't there loads more?
Yeah, okay, fair question. Let's concentrate on the managing point source efforts. Let's talk about discharge and wastewaters, and because I think the answer's there, and I've been through quite a lot of testing with trying to get these solutions running, both with the water utilities and with industries, but also with farmers and what have you. A lot of it comes down to the fact that we don't all know an awful lot about these crops, and there is of course there's no promotion, there's no incentive, there's no kind of there's no sort of push to plant crops. And if you come from a kind of a culture where I am, which is big livestock, it's a lot of grass, a lot of pasture farming, a lot of dairy, a lot of beef, sheep, and yeah, okay, we'll have pigs and chickens as well. But we've got an intensive livestock sector. It is about the livestock sector. So if land starts to go into a crop that isn't necessarily a crop that they know there's an end market and an end route for, why would you do it? I do get that, and we've had scenarios like that both north and south of the border here, where certain farmers have taken the leap and they've planted a load of miscanthus or they've planted a load of willow, but in the end, when they come to try to move it on, it's just not happening. So we do have very much of a chicken and egg, I'm afraid, going on, and it does come down to can the crop actually make money in the end? And if those supply chains aren't there, then why would you grow the crop? So I think a lot of that is the reason. But coming from the other side, though, from the wastewater handler, if you like, the water utility, the industry, what they're wanting, of course, is a solution that makes sense, of course, and is low carbon. And the more than the low carbon argument comes in, the better. But they also want a solution that will work non-stop. That'll always work, and it won't just be, as I've illustrated there, we can get a 50% reduction in discharge through the year on average from that project I showed you, and 80 to 90% reduction through the summer months. To me, that's fantastic. That's great. But does regulation always allow that to be implemented, or does regulation require to be copper fastened and say no, all of it must be dealt with, otherwise it's not an acceptable solution? So we probably do look for some kind of regulation flexibility in there as well. So regulation has to adapt. Now it's interesting, in Northern Ireland we have done that with the Environments Agency, where we've had a tool whereby whereby we can actually manage the discharge to the land when the land can take it, and discharge to the stream when the stream can take it. And if you ask me, that's the best of both worlds. It's working with the environment, it's working with the changing environment for the overall benefit. And we've got a circularity of nutrient, and we've got a production of a carbon resource. But that's going to take people to focus and concentrate and think, is this a solution that we really do want? And can the carbon credentials of low carbon solutions be implemented in the overall targets of the water company or the industry that with the wastewater? So I think it's about trying to just talk about it more, illustrate the benefits more, and maybe as policy starts to be inset towards net zero and water quality and air quality and soil quality, we might see these solutions be taken up more and more. It's a long, there's a lot of reasons, Kevin, but hopefully that's illustrated some of them.
What do you think, Neil, in terms of flood mitigation? Are you aware of any in other places across Europe?
Yeah, there's a huge use of willow in Scandinavia, and also beyond Europe, Canada and America use willow exactly how Chris described it earlier through his systems, and for natural flood management and sort of riverside control of erosion and stuff like that. So we're, again, on a few things we're a bit behind on a few things, but we can learn from these people. We can do some study trips and bring some of that back, but we just need our policy people to perhaps join us on those study trips and see the advantages. And the wonderful thing is we have some advantages here. I've got 8-9 sites I can top of my head. Chris is showing the slides from his areas that he's working into. So what an opportunity. I think with willow in general, there's a lot of myths about it as well. You're talking about end markets. Chris was struggling a bit with. We sell a lot to greenhouses, to farm biomass boilers, to larger boilers, and a lot of it's myth busting. The biomass boiler breaks down. It's the wood chip. The wood chip guy says it's the boiler. The boiler guy says it's the wood chip. So as a consultancy practice, we go through the 30 things it could be, and we solve that issue. So if it's the wood chip not being clean, i.e. there's soil contamination, which slags boilers up, we solve that issue. We make sure that is being harvested cleanly, no slagging, no issue. If the boiler's settings are not correct, we solve that issue. So I think there's a lot of myth busting to go on, because it's a great wood chip. It's a great product. There's a great mulch product out of it. There's as I say, briquettes, heat logs. I know over in Ireland that there's a big gap in the market for briquettes and heat logs into the domestic market. So that's a real opportunity there. Coffee logs is not working anymore in the UK, unfortunately, but so there's a big gap in the market here in the UK for heat logs and briquettes, and there's a raft of other end market opportunities that we can dive into. And I bet you guys didn't know, or perhaps people on this seminar didn't know, that aspirin used to be made out of the bark of willow back in the day, when we maybe drank too many glasses of wine. So there's just a raft of different products that can be made from willow, and we've just got to think outside the box and get it out there and dispel the myths, really.
Okay, so a few extra questions. We'll try and get through as quickly as possible. So fairly succinct answers, please. So first one, does willow on farms planted come under the agricultural definition by government, or is it classed under the LULUCF category like forestry would be? I'm not even sure.
Neil answered that actually earlier on. It's an agricultural crop, so it's land use. It comes under the LULUCF, land use change in forestry. Okay. It's an agricultural crop.
Okay. Another one. If farmers are able to make a profit from these crops but couldn't from any other kind of crop due to living in a floodplain, do they really need to further financial incentives? Is that still the main barrier, or is it training / information? This question.
I think it's all three. I think if you can get a grant for something else, and if you are short on cash, you're short on capital monies, and there's a grant, then that's going to incentivize and really help people, because not every farm owner is cash rich. And that investment. Now, we do work with some banks that help people, because obviously when you harvest willow, it takes 3 or 4 years before you can grow it, harvest it, and then reap the reward. So there's that three-year gap of having no income. So yes, the answer is we do need grants, we do need incentives, and because there is those incentives and grants for everything else out there, bar the willow. So I would encourage our policymakers to provide those grants. Can you do it without? Yeah, if you've got a wealthy landowner, money isn't an issue. Yeah, no problem. He can put it in himself, but there's not many of them out there at the minute.
Okay, we've got one from MJ. What width of willow planting is required alongside a river to have a desired flood mitigation effect? I would also say to Chris, same thing for water protection as well. So what sort of buffer strip is required?
Yeah, well, I mean, for water quality protection, you know, how long's a piece of string? The more buffer strip you have, the better. But then again, you might have your agricultural enterprise that you'd like to maintain. So the sites that I was talking about earlier, we did 2 rows of the planter, so we're talking 9-meter buffers, eight double rows. I think that makes sense. It's also practical, it's implementable, but you know, it'll very much depend on the scenario. But for flooding, Neil?
Yeah, as much as possible. It's, you know, and also a reasonable amount if you're going to be harvesting it regularly to make the commercial productive side of things work. So I normally say to people, if you can get 25 acres in, that really helps everybody and makes it financially good for, you know, the end markets as well.
I would probably also add that I think modelling would be very, very good if there was some funding to do models, so we plant exactly the right amount in the right place to do the best benefit, rather than just planting it by the water course in and hoping that it works. So that's another thing that we probably need. There is a question about planting willow in an SSSI or SAC. I'm going to refer people to webinar 4 for that one, because that was in the season 1, episode 4. You can find that information.
Just sorry, Kevin, just on that one, we've just had a new planting site go through, and that's next to those triple SIs and those sorts of. You just go through consultation with your local representatives, Natural England's, forestry commissions, and then as soon as you agree it all planted correctly in the right different ways, it can be agreed and put through. So it's just a lot of dialogue and a lot of meetings.
I've just got a couple of. There was a question about using willow for AD. I just wonder, Chris, you've got a little bit of experience of that. So willow residues for anaerobic digestion.
Yeah, we wouldn't really recommend that. Yeah, we've been involved in some project work where the remnants, actually, weirdly, of phytoceutical extraction, including the salicins, which Neil mentioned there, they've been trying to anaerobically digest that, but it doesn't produce anywhere near a decent biomass, biomethane yield. So you know, it's too lignany, it's too you know, it's too lignified, doesn't tend to digest. Yeah, you can pre-treat it and put a lot of energy into it and try to break it all up so it can be hydrolyzed, but really I don't see willow as being a wonderful AD feedstock, if that's what the question was getting at. There's other crops I would far rather grow, which would be far more digestible. In essence, if I can eat it, then an AD plant can.
Sure, very, very good point. Also, just one quick thing, you did mention at one point about industrial effluents. Could you say a couple that you know that have been used on willow in the past? Yeah,
we've developed a few projects over the last sort of 10 years, more than that, actually 20 years, where we've been taking wastewaters from dairy processors, bakeries, breweries. The landfill stuff is really, really interesting because it makes the willow grow massively because of the high ammonia in there. So yeah, those would be some. Oh, actually, fruit processors as well. A fruit wastewater, quite acidic, neutralized, and then irrigated to the willow plantation. Just on the willow plantation, no harm at all. Now, the willow does not need that sugar, of course. The crops don't need that sugar, but it adds carbon into the soil. The willow plantation managing the discharge. It's running under license, and it's proved to be an excellently economically viable solution for the producer of the wastewater, far better than what he was doing before, which is sticking it into a tanker and driving it 20 miles.
Okay, final question for both of you. We are running slightly over time, to keep it short. Do you think there are any knowledge gaps that need to be filled before policymakers recognise the potential for SRC Willow to be deployed for both of these aspects?
As far as the areas I'm talking on, there has been so much done. I think it just maybe needs a little bit more emphasis and interest shown on actually implementing it. You know, if we're serious about net zero, we're serious about agricultural diversification, water quality, we're serious about you know, trying to comply with climate change and where the pressures might come in the future. I think these crops are naturally will find their niche. There's plenty of research and evidence done. All I've been trying to do is sort of bring them up into a practical implementation and a demonstration scenario. So I think there's more there. And if policymakers need more evidence, well, we'll go out and get it. They can tell us what they want.
No.
I have a huge library of data out there, so I think there's plenty of data. There's plenty of studies been done over the 15 years I've been doing it. And as Chris said, if we need to do more, as long as it's practical and we're actually putting it in the ground and doing it and visualizing it, happy to do that, happy to do more of that, and happy to make the most of what we've already got on the ground as well. I think we just need to get cracking and do it.
And for my 2 penneth, I would say that the cost benefit analysis needs to be done, because these are cheap applications, very, very cheap to establish, in respect of the fact that something like Storm Desmond, I think, cost the UK economy 3 billion. The water quality costs are into the millions each year for us as a nation on GDP. So it's a no-brainer when you've got things that can work and can be applied in the help for climate mitigation. I think it is a no-brainer, and I just wait to see us doing it en masse, really. I really hope it will happen. Thank you both very much. It's been really illuminating. We've had some nice comments in the chat there saying it's been a great webinar, so that's brilliant. The webinars are coming thick and fast over the next few months, which will be interesting to everyone, hopefully. The next one is going to be on the third time we do some interesting alternatives, and we're going to look at the incredibly fast growing and very dense wood that is produced from Robinia, black locust trees, and also an alternative to miscanthus produced from energy canes. 2 really excellent speakers. Is on the 19th of December. I'm sure that that's going to get us really into the mood for a very, very good biomass. I'm sure you saw what I did there. Anyway, there, if we could just show the partners and thank our sponsor, Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero, without whom we would not be able to put on these webinars. The next slide is the social media handles. Please check us out and stay connected with us. This is the way to find out all of the things we're doing. Obviously, the Biomass Connect website is constantly growing, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for coming. I hope that all of you will come back next time, and please tell your friends. And until then, until we meet again, thank you very much and good night.